The Kuwait sun hung like a threat over the training base, turning the air into something you had to chew before breathing. Staff Sergeant Maria Torres stood near the back of the formation, half hidden in the shadow of a shipping container, watching the battalion assemble for what everyone had been calling the record run all week. The combat fitness lanes stretched out before them like a gauntlet, sled drags, ammo can carries, casualty drags, the works, all leading to a full kit run under that merciless sky. At 38, Maria had learned to make herself small in formations like this. Not invisible, exactly, but unremarkable. Just another logistics NCO in a sea of soldiers. Someone who kept the machine running but never stood on the podium. She wore her PT uniform like everyone else, her compact frame coiled with a quiet strength that no one seemed to notice anymore. "Yo, you think supply's gonna finish?" The voice carried across the formation, loud and sharp with laughter. Sergeant Blake, all 26 years of cocky certainty, stood with his squad, gesturing in her direction. "Torres, you even run, or you just drive the forklift these days?" The younger soldiers around him snickered. Blake fed off it, his grin widening. "I'm just saying, most coffee cups don't do well on the combat lanes." Maria kept her eyes forward, jaw tight, saying nothing. She'd heard variations of this before, in the motor pool, in the DFAC, in every space where being a logistics NCO in your late 30s made you somehow less than. Blake had made it his personal mission this rotation to remind everyone that she wasn't infantry, wasn't combat arms, wasn't one of the real soldiers. The battalion's sergeant major began calling names for the record attempt heat. Maria wasn't on the list. She planned to run in a later, quieter group. But then came the complication. Private Jensen twisted his ankle during warm-ups, and someone needed to fill the slot. "Torres," the sergeant major called. "You're up." The formation shifted. Heads turned. Blake's laugh cut through the murmur like a blade. "Oh, this is going to be good." He stepped closer, making sure everyone could hear. His voice dropped just enough to sound like concern, but his eyes gleamed with challenge. "Seriously, Sergeant Torres, you sure about this? It's the wrecker heat. A lot of pressure. Don't want you to." "I'm good, Sergeant," Maria said quietly, stepping out of the shadow. Blake spread his hands in mock surrender, playing to the crowd. "Hey, I'm just looking out. But you know what?" He raised his voice again, making it a spectacle. "Go ahead. Prove it." The words hung in the scorching air like a dare, like a sentence. Around them, soldiers exchanged glances, some amused, some uncomfortable, all watching. The record attempt had suddenly become about more than times and bragging rights. Blake had made it personal, made it public, turned Maria's slot into a challenge she never asked for. She met his eyes for a brief second, said nothing, and walked toward the start line. Her hands didn't shake, but inside, something old and familiar stirred. The feeling of being dismissed, underestimated, measured by appearance instead of scars. And beneath that, deeper down, the muscle memory of every time she'd had to prove she belonged, prove she could carry the weight, prove she was more than what they saw. The formation watched her take her position. Blake was still grinning. The clock was about to start talking. What they didn't know, what Blake and his squad and half the battalion didn't know, was that Maria Torres hadn't built her strength in a gym chasing personal records or viral moments. She'd built it on Route Tampa in 2007, pulling a gunner out of a burning truck while mortars walked toward their position. She'd built it hauling 60-pound ammo cans across a firebase in the dark because the resupply bird got weathered out and the fighting positions needed to stay stocked. She'd built it on endless perimeter walks at Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti, supporting missions into Somalia and the wider Horn of Africa that never made headlines, where being logistics meant you were the difference between a successful op and a stranded team. Iraq had been dust and violence and long convoys where every overpass was a potential ambush, every pile of trash a possible IED. Maria remembered the weight of the gear, the taste of fear, the way time stretched and compressed when contact broke out. She remembered the sound of metal tearing, the smell of burning fuel, the split-second decision to run toward the wreck instead of away from it, because that's what you did. You didn't leave people behind. There was a citation somewhere in a forgotten file drawer, an award recommendation that got stuck in paperwork purgatory when her unit redeployed and scattered. A near-miss Bronze Star upgrade that someone mentioned once and then never followed through on. No social media moment. No viral post. Just a report that said she'd pulled 2 wounded soldiers from a smoking MRAP while taking indirect fire, administered aid while waiting for the evac bird, then went right back to her convoy escort rotation the next day. Djibouti had been different, less kinetic but no less demanding. Advisory work meant coordinating with coalition partners, managing supply chains across borders, ensuring teams heading into austere environments had what they needed to come home. It meant long hours in a cramped TOC, fixing problems before they became crises, moving through the background while operators got the spotlight. She didn't talk about any of it much. What was there to say? Half the people in this battalion had deployed too, had their own stories, their own scars. The difference was that hers didn't fit the image they expected. She wasn't infantry, wasn't kicking doors, wasn't the kind of veteran who showed up on recruiting posters. So here, in Kuwait, on this pre-deployment rotation, she was just the logistics NCO. The supply sergeant who kept the gear flowing, who fixed the manifest when someone screwed up the paperwork, who made sure Blake and his boys had clean weapons and working radios without them ever thinking about how that happened. Critical, but invisible. Necessary, but dismissed. Every time she hauled a pallet or sorted a load plan or checked a vehicle for the 10th time, she carried the weight of those Iraqi convoys, those Djibouti missions, that muscle memory of what happens when logistics fails and people die because of it. But Blake didn't see that. None of them did. They saw a quiet, older woman in the rear. Supply sergeant with a coffee cup. The record attempt wasn't about proving she could run fast. It was about every unseen mile, every lifted weight, every scar they couldn't see because they'd never bothered to ask where she'd been before they met her. The disrespect hadn't started with Blake's challenge at the formation. It had been building for weeks, small cuts that accumulated into a pattern. In the DFAC, Maria overheard junior soldiers speculating about her background over rubbery eggs and weak coffee. Torres? I don't think she's ever deployed. I mean, she's got a combat patch, but it's not from anything recent. Probably just Kuwait or something. They didn't recognize the faded 4th Infantry Division patch from the Surge era. Didn't connect it to the hell of Iraqi supply routes when IEDs were everywhere and every convoy was a roll of the dice. To them, if it wasn't Afghanistan or the recent stuff, it didn't count. On the motor pool line, Blake made a show of second-guessing her load plans. She'd carefully calculated weight distribution, fuel considerations, maintenance schedules, the kind of detailed planning that came from years of keeping convoys alive. He'd glance at her work, then loudly rewrite it in front of the platoon. "All right, let me fix this real quick," he'd announce, markers squeaking across the whiteboard. "Logistics has the wish list, but we gotta deal with reality." His version inevitably missed something, a fuel calculation, a timeline conflict, but by then the damage was done. He looked decisive. She looked tentative. The platoon remembered his loud confidence, not her quiet competence. Even when his plan failed inspection later, requiring a last-minute scramble that Maria had to fix in the background, the story that stuck was Blake taking charge. A younger female private, PFC Chun, tried to defend her once. Sergeant Torres actually had it right the first time. The weight distribution. "Relax, Chun," Blake cut her off with a grin. "It's just banter. We're all on the same team here." He clapped Maria on the shoulder like they were buddies. "Right, Sergeant Torres? You know I'm just giving you shit." The platoon laughed. The moment defused. The message clear. Calling out disrespect makes you the problem, not the disrespect itself. But there were clues if anyone had been paying attention. Maria's ruck was taped with old-school precision, the kind you only saw from people who'd carried heavy loads for real. Her unit T-shirts were from Iraq-era brigades that didn't exist anymore, faded but carefully maintained. Once, during a rehearsal, she'd casually use vocabulary, actions on, bumping in, the cadence of how she called corrections, that suggested she'd been around Real professionals, not just garrison experts. Nobody connected the dots. She was supply. She was older. She was quiet. That was enough for them to file her under doesn't matter. The frustration built in Maria's chest like slow-burning coal. Not explosive anger, but the steady heat of being underestimated again and again. She'd spent 20 years proving herself in spaces that didn't want her. As a young female soldier in male-dominated units, as a logistics specialist in a culture that valued trigger pullers over sustainers, as someone who'd done real things in real places while people like Blake collected Instagram followers. She didn't need external validation. Her record spoke for itself. But watching Private Chin's face fall when she got shut down for speaking truth, watching younger soldiers absorb the lesson that loud confidence beats quiet competence, watching Blake turn her experience into a punchline day after day, that burned. So when Blake sneered, "Go ahead, prove it," at the formation, it wasn't just about that moment. It was the culmination of every joke, every dismissal, every time her suggestions got rewritten by someone who'd never bled for logistics to work. The starting line wasn't just about a record. It was about making them see what they'd refused to notice. The battalion combat fitness course stretched across the Kuwaiti training area like a crucible designed to separate pretenders from performers. First came the sled drags, 90 pounds of iron and chain through deep sand for 50 meters. Then the ammo can carries, 240-pound cans held at arm's length while you sprinted between markers. The casualty drag followed, 185 pounds of dead weight that had to be hauled 30 meters through an obstacle lane. Sprint drag carry stations tested explosive movement under load. A grenade throw accuracy station measured steadiness under fatigue. Finally, the killer, a 1.5-mile run in full kit with weapon, helmet, and plate carrier across uneven terrain under the merciless sun. The battalion record had stood for 3 years, set by an infantry sergeant who'd since moved on to Ranger Regiment. His time was legendary, the kind of number people quoted in hushed tones, 1642. Nobody had come within 20 seconds of touching it. Blake ran first in Maria's heat, surrounded by his cheerleading section. He attacked the course with explosive energy, yanking the sled, powering through the carries, moving with the kind of aggressive confidence that looked impressive. His buddies shouted splits at him. When he crossed the finish line, the timer read 17:48. Respectable, nowhere near the record, but enough to puff his chest. "Let's see someone beat that," he shouted, hands on knees, breathing hard. Then, louder, making sure Maria heard, "Nobody's touching that today." The crowd around the course had grown. Word had spread about Blake's challenge, about the supplies sergeant in the record heat. Soldiers gathered to watch, some making quiet bets, others just curious. A few older NCOs stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching Maria with more thoughtful expressions. When she stepped to the line, the noise dropped to murmurs. $5, she DNFs on the casualty drag, someone whispered. "Nah, she'll finish. Just slow." Maria ignored them all. She adjusted her gloves, rolled her shoulders once, and focused on the sled in front of her. The official timer raised his hand. "On your mark." Everything else fell away. "Go!" She exploded into motion. Her grip on the sled handles was perfect, hand positioned exactly where leverage mattered most. Instead of just yanking with arm strength, she drove with her hips, using her legs and core to generate power. Technique learned from years of moving heavy things efficiently, not for show, but because the mission demanded it. The sand fought every step, but her footwork was deliberate, maintaining forward momentum without wasting energy on slipping or overcorrecting. Muscle memory from Iraq, from dragging equipment through compounds, from pulling people from vehicles. "Split," the cadre NCO called. First station, 48 seconds. She's 3 seconds ahead of pace. The murmur around the course shifted slightly. Not convinced yet, but paying attention. Ammo can carries next. Maria grabbed both 40-pound cans, held them steady at arm's length, and moved. Her breathing was controlled, rhythmic, the kind of pattern you develop when you've done cardiovascular work under stress for real. Not the gasping of someone who trained for appearance, but the steady engine of someone who'd carried weight because lives depended on it. Second station, 1:42 cumulative. Still ahead of pace. 5 seconds now. The casualty drag was where people expected her to break. Hauling 185 pounds through obstacles demanded not just strength, but technique and mental toughness. Maria crouched low, grabbed the drag dummy's shoulders, and used her entire body as a unit. She didn't try to muscle it. She used angles, momentum, intelligent routing through the obstacles. Halfway through, her legs shook. The sun hammered down. Sweat poured into her eyes. She didn't stop. Third station, 3:15 cumulative. She's 8 seconds ahead of record pace. The casual smirks around the course were gone now. Soldiers leaned in, watching closely. Blake had stopped celebrating with his friends. He was staring. Sprint drag carry stations blurred together. Explosive movements that drew on fast-twitch muscle and mental refusal to quit. Maria's transitions were efficient. No wasted motion between stations. Every step, every grab, every pivot came from somewhere deep, from training that wasn't about posting times on social media, but about surviving contact, about being ready when it mattered. Grenade Station, 5:20 cumulative. 10 seconds ahead. Her hands were steady on the practice grenades. 3 throws, 3 hits on the target zone. The accuracy surprised people. Shouldn't she be shaking from fatigue? But Maria had thrown grenades for real, had qualified on ranges where the difference between good and good enough was measured in survival. Her hands knew what to do, even when her lungs burned. Then came the final crucible. 1.5 miles, full kit, uneven terrain. This was where records died. You could sprint through the early stations on adrenaline, but the run demanded sustained output when your body was already screaming for mercy. Maria settled into a pace that looked almost casual until you realized she wasn't slowing down. Her stride was economical, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. This wasn't about one good day. This was about 20 years of carrying weight, of staying mission ready, of maintaining fitness not for glory, but because you never knew when you'd have to pull someone out of the fire. The soldiers watching began to realize something was happening. Real-time math spread through the crowd. At the 1-mile mark, she was still ahead of record pace. If she maintains this, she can't. Nobody maintains in the last half-mile. But Maria did. Her legs shook. Her vision narrowed. Every breath was work. But somewhere deep in her muscle memory, in the place where Iraq lived and Djibouti lived, and every hard thing she'd ever done lived, there was still fuel. The finish line appeared. Maria didn't sprint. She didn't have a sprint left, but she didn't slow either. She crossed at the same grinding, unstoppable pace she'd held for the last half-mile. She collapsed to one knee, chest heaving, gear coated in dust and sweat. For a moment, everything was silent except for labored breathing and the ringing in her ears. The cadre NCO stared at his stopwatch, checked it again, checked it a third time. His voice, when it came, was loud enough to carry 16:35. New battalion record. The crowd around the finish line stood frozen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Blake's respectable time had been demolished. The legendary 3-year-old record had been shattered by the supply sergeant, by the quiet woman in her late 30s who was just logistics. The math didn't compute for them. It couldn't compute because it broke the story they'd been telling themselves about who mattered and who didn't. Maria stayed on one knee, pulling air into her lungs in ragged gasps. Her legs trembled. Sweat darkened her uniform. She looked exactly like what she was, a human being who just pushed their body to the absolute limit. The younger soldiers who'd laughed earlier suddenly found other places to look. A few shuffled their feet, faces flushed with something that might have been embarrassment. The older NCOs exchanged glances, pieces clicking into place. The taped ruck, the old unit shirts, the vocabulary, the way she carried herself with that particular kind of quiet confidence that came from actual experience. Blake stood at the edge of the crowd. His earlier swagger completely evaporated. His friends had gone silent around him. The public challenge he'd thrown had backfired spectacularly, and everyone had witnessed it. A commotion rippled through the gathered soldiers. A colonel was approaching, visiting from higher headquarters to observe the pre-deployment rotation. He'd been on the other side of the training area, but had walked over when he heard the excitement about a new record. "Who broke it?" he asked the sergeant major. "Staff Sergeant Torres, sir." Logistics. The colonel's weathered face, marked by multiple deployments and years of service, registered something. Recognition, maybe, or connection. Torres? Maria Torres, 4th ID, Convoy Security, Iraq. Maria looked up from her kneeling position, still breathing hard. Yes, sir. The colonel stepped closer, his voice respectful. I thought that was you. I was brigade staff in '07. Came through your FOB during the surge. I read the report about the MRAP ambush. You pulled 2 wounded soldiers out while taking indirect fire. He glanced at the watching soldiers, then back to Maria. There was a citation for that, if I remember. Bronze Star recommendation that got hung up in the transition when your battalion redeployed. The crowd around them had gone completely still. You could have heard a pin drop in the sand. It wasn't a big deal, sir, Maria said quietly, finally getting to her feet. We all did what we had to do. That's exactly what people who do extraordinary things always say, the colonel replied. He turned to address the gathered soldiers, not lecturing, but simply stating fact. I've seen a lot of heroes in my career. Most of them didn't look like what people expected. Most of them did their jobs quietly, kept their teams alive, and never asked for recognition. He looked back at Maria. The best professionals never do. In the silence that followed, Blake stepped forward. His face was red, whether from sun, exertion, or shame was hard to tell. Sergeant Torres, his voice caught. He tried again. I was out of line. The stuff I said, the way I'm sorry. It wasn't a polished apology. It was awkward and uncomfortable and probably prompted as much by the colonel's presence as by genuine remorse. But it was public, which mattered because the disrespect had been public too. Maria nodded once. Acknowledged Sergeant Blake. She didn't pile on, didn't gloat, didn't take the opportunity to twist the knife. She just acknowledged it and moved on, because that's what professionals did. The contrast between her restraint and his earlier loudness spoke volumes. Private Chun appeared at Maria's elbow with a water bottle. That was incredible, Sergeant. It was necessary, Maria replied, taking the water. Then, softer, thank you for speaking up in the motor pool last week. That mattered. Around them, the crowd began to disperse, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. Conversations erupted in hushed tones as soldiers reassessed everything they thought they knew about the quiet logistics NCO, who'd just destroyed the record they all thought was untouchable. The loud voices had been silenced, not by anger or revenge, but by simple, undeniable truth. Maria Torres was exactly who she'd always been. They just finally bothered to see it. In the days that followed, the battalion didn't suddenly erupt in celebration or transform Maria into some kind of superhero. Real change rarely works like that, but small shifts rippled through the unit, subtle but meaningful. In the DFAC, when Maria carried her tray past a table of younger soldiers, they made space. Not with fanfare, just a scooted chair and a nod. Chun sat next to her, asking questions about load planning with genuine interest instead of polite tolerance. On the motor pool line, Blake presented his revised convoy plan to the platoon. When he got to the logistics section, he paused and turned to Maria. Sergeant Torres reviewed this. She has some adjustments. He handed her the marker. No theatrics, no undermining, just simple deference to actual expertise. Maria made her corrections, explained the reasoning in her typical quiet way, and handed the marker back. The platoon listened. She didn't get a promotion or a medal or a viral moment. Her name didn't trend on social media. The next day, she went right back to checking manifests, inspecting load straps, tracking equipment deadlines, and ensuring the battalion had what it needed to function. The work that mattered but rarely got noticed. The difference was that now, when she spoke, people listened. When she gave guidance, it was followed without question. The respect she'd always deserved, she finally received. Not because she demanded it, but because she'd proven what should have been obvious from the start. Private Chun walked a little taller now. She'd watched the whole thing unfold and learned something valuable. Quiet competence beats loud arrogance every time. The truth always surfaces eventually. Sometimes you just have to wait for the moment when performance becomes undeniable. The battalion's deployment loomed closer, and Maria knew what lay ahead. The same work she'd always done, keeping the machine running while others got glory. That was fine. She didn't need glory. She needed the mission to succeed and her people to come home. Every military unit has its Torres figures, quiet professionals carrying histories nobody bothers to ask about until something forces the question. They're the backbone that holds the structure together, the ones who make everything else possible while standing in shadows they never sought. The lesson, if there was one, wasn't complicated. Don't confuse loud confidence with actual competence. Don't assume you know someone's value by their job title or age or how much noise they make. And maybe, just maybe, take the time to ask where people have been before you decide who they are. Maria Torres had been proving herself her entire career. She'd proven it in Iraq, in Djibouti, in Kuwait, in 1,000 unseen moments of competence under pressure. The record run didn't change that. It just made visible what had always been true. Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment where the quiet professional gets to show who they really are, and everyone else has to reconcile the gap between what they assumed and what is. The sandstorm settled. The record stood. And the next day, Maria Torres went back to work. Same as always, but different because now they knew to pay attention. Respect, real respect, is never demanded. It's earned through consistent character under pressure, through competence demonstrated when it matters most, through the willingness to prove yourself one more time even when you shouldn't have to. She'd proven it, and that was enough.